So all those brilliant observations on my part just are lost to history. Let's see if I can get this to... This rotary motor, by the way, and last week it actually rotated for us, is actually made out of proteins. About 30-some proteins that make up this rotary motor. If you do a schematic diagram down at Missouri University, down in Rolla, where all the STEM majors like to go, I send students there all the time. This is what a schematic diagram would look like. If you were to look at a schematic diagram of a rotary motor we would make, we would just have some different words, but this is all made out of proteins. All made out of proteins. And it's an irreducibly complex system, meaning if any one of those proteins is not in place, this rotary motor doesn't work. It's a piece of junk. It's a liability. It is a waste of resources for that organism. So a Darwinian evolutionary explanation for how this might be cobbled together over as much time as you might want to put together this complex motor is an explanation that is pretty barren. It's pretty hard to imagine that possibility. The statistics are overwhelmingly against it, that complex structures like proteins could happen to fit together into a greater complex structure like a rotary motor. And we actually are now discovering these and saying, hey, we can copy these. We can copy these. There it is. And this whole field of copying God's nanotechnology is a field called biomimetics. And it's really been exploding over the last decade or so. And in the field of biomimetics, it's the idea, let's look in nature, look in God's creation, and find some of these nanomachines. Your cells have thousands of nanomachines in them, pumps and conveyor belts and trucks and motors and things like that do all kinds of marvelous things. Can we duplicate that? Can we? And the answer is yes, we do that all the time. We're looking at nature, and there are books now being written on our discoveries in nature of technologies that God has already embedded in what He's made, and we just have to discover them. I have this mental picture on occasion where God is saying, come on, you guys, there's this really cool thing I want you to discover. You'll find it really helpful. And then finally says, okay, we're going to have to do a little serendipity here. And a scientist accidentally discovers it, even though they weren't looking for it. Sometimes science moves with that kind of leap. It's not intentional. It's purely by accident. A good example would be penicillin from 100 years ago. All right. Technology, master or servant. And again, here's the idea of using what does it mean to be made in the image of God. That if we are not careful, if we do not recognize that we are to be, have dominion over the technology that we create and be wise stewards of that technology. It's very possible, just like any idol, just like in Jeremiah when it talks about, you guys, you just take this chunk of wood and then you use some of the wood to cook your food and some of the wood to heat your house, and then you carve an image out of the rest of the wood and you call that an idol and you worship it. What's with that? So we create something and it can do marvelous things for us, and then we begin to worship it. So there's this idol worship of technology, which is the loss of our spirituality. Instead of worshiping God, we're worshiping something that we made. There's this loss of rationalization. And it's very irrational to worship a bunch of atoms and molecules and things that we've manipulated. Very irrational to worship wood or stone historically. Then there's this isolation, loss of relationships. Human flourishing requires us to be in community. We know from so many experiments and so many observations of twin studies and children who have been abandoned and elderly adults who are living all by themselves with the occasional visit from a caregiver, but no family, that these people go downhill very, very, very fast. That isolation, loss of relationships. And then when you're held captive, when you're slaved, you're not creative anymore. You're kind of an automaton. Maybe you saw this movie and the several that followed it. I know I saw the first one years ago. I don't know what it is with the fascination with black and sunglasses, but so artificial intelligence. Here we go, and I am practically positive that many of you will know way more about artificial intelligence than I do. And my role, my job, or my calling before the Lord is not necessarily to be the expert in these fields, but maybe to help people to think about them Christianly, and provoke people into thinking about them, and bring them to people's awareness. So some of this will be kind of teaching you. I mean, it doesn't take long to teach you as much as I know about artificial intelligence, but then this will help us to begin to think about it from a biblical point of view. So first of all, what in the world is an algorithm? It's a word that comes from maybe the 6th or 7th century out of Arabia, and it's a name of the father of algebra. And it has nothing to do with Al Gore, by the way. Unless he was, rapping or something, Al Gore rhythm. But anyway, teacher joke or dad joke, depending upon which place I'm at. So I'll give you an algorithm, and maybe you'll recognize it. Y equals mx plus b. Anyone know that algorithm? Poor Daniel, he's saying, I know he's going to call me. I know he's going to call me. Well, that's the equation for a straight line. So you can go anywhere in the universe, and if you need to come up with a mathematical description of a straight line, that equation will work. That's kind of amazing that we have discovered the equation for something that is true through all time and through all space. Simple, y equals mx plus b, where m is the slope of the line, okay? So that's an algorithm, and you can put that into a computer program, and then the computer can execute that algorithm and tell you information about any straight line in the universe, okay? So computer programs have lots and lots of algorithms in them. How many of you have ever done computer programming? Okay, several of you. I've done computer programming. I learned some of that, taught myself basic years ago, but and I've learned a lot from my father. So you embed these algorithms in your computer software. So algorithms are person-made. I used to say man-made, but can't say that anymore. Person-made. Of course, nowadays, if you say man and woman-made, even that's, you can really ruffle some people's feathers. But and if they're listening in China right now, or someplace, not China, but someplace on here, when they look at this video, they may take it off the air for what I just said. But so you embed the algorithms into the program, and the program can handle lots and lots of algorithms, and they can feed into each other. We use this phrase neural network, neuro referring to neurons, and the brain has billions and billions of neurons, all right? Machine learning, we're stuck with words like learning when we apply it to machines, and that's very different than the way you and I learn, okay? We just don't have the vocabulary. There's a similarity, but it's not the same. And the tendency is to say, well, machines can learn, I can learn, that must mean the same thing, I'm nothing but a machine. Or the machine is as good as I am. And that is not true, okay? When machines are learning, they're learning very, very differently than the way you and I learn, all right? And then we have to distinguish between narrow AI and general AI. We are surrounded by narrow AI. I've already used it multiple times today, all right? Just if you use your smartphone, if you're searching for something online, it's keeping track of the things that you search, the things that you're interested in on Amazon, the things that you like to watch on TV, the people you usually contact on your phone. Your car is gathering information. Narrow AI is the kind of artificial intelligence that's very, very, very focused. Very focused on one particular task to do it at light speed, okay? General AI, the AI is the idea that maybe someday AI will more closely mimic your and my intelligence in the sense of being much more broad-based and being able to tackle multiple different kinds of things. Okay, we've already tackled multiple problems today. You know, the problem, okay, how do I get ready for church? How do I prepare my breakfast? How do I, you know, all the different things you've done are very, very different tasks, and all would require a different narrow AI to do. Now, to give you an example of machine learning, let's say a brain surgeon uses AI, and they would have to program the AI and provide it the algorithms, which we'll talk about the challenges of that in a minute. So I have a brain scan, and there's a tumor in that brain scan, and as the expert, the brain surgeon, the neuromedical doctor says this brain scan has a brain tumor, and you feed that, meaning you can scan it or whatever into the computer, and you tell it this has a brain scan, and then you do that again and again and again, and maybe you do that 100 or 1,000 times. So now you've got about 1,000 brain scans in the memory of the computer. Okay, not a difficult thing to do, very easy. And now this is where the algorithm comes in. You tell the computer, okay, look for a pattern, look for a regularity, look for something that's common in all of these things. Okay, and then once you've done that, then you feed it another brain scan, but you don't tell the computer, you know, that it's whether there's a tumor or not, and maybe you don't even know. And then the computer looks for a pattern or regularity based upon those previous 1,000 scans and say, I see a pattern. I think there is brain cancer, or I don't see a pattern, okay? And now, at this point, what the brain surgeon might do is tell the computer, you thought there was a tumor here, but there's not. And so the computer takes that into consideration, adds that to its database, refines its algorithm a little bit, and now you feed it another brain scan and another brain scan. And pretty soon, and this has already happened in a lot of different areas, the computer can tell you better and more consistently, and certainly a lot more rapidly than you can, whether there's a tumor or not in that brain scan. Okay? That's called machine learning. Make sense? So, just to give you some examples, we use artificial intelligence for facial recognition software, which can have thinking of looking for common grace. We can be scanning people before they get on the airplane and make sure they're not on the terrorist wanted list. But then again, like in China and some places, you can be scanning every single person. And in China, for example, as they scan people going about their lives in many of the major cities, you earn points. And if you're doing the right kinds of things that the government wants you to do, you get points. If you're doing the not right kind of things, like you try to go to church or something like that, you lose points. And then that determines promotions and whether you can travel and so forth. So here's my question. Which one of these faces, and there could be more than one, is not real? Which one or more have been created through artificial intelligence?
Second one, the young man, second. Up on the opposite side.
Here?
Second one up.
Him?
Yeah.
I don't know what your criteria is, but we'll have to feed additional information in so that you can modify your algorithms. But, well, we don't have time because they're all human. I mean, excuse me, none of them are human. They're all fabrications. This is from New York Times. Every now and then you get something helpful out. I shouldn't have said that. Sorry about the New York Times. These are all fabrications, all created by artificial intelligence. Once the artificial intelligence has been fed enough human faces, it can create a face. None of these are real people. So if you're looking for them in the pews,
Well, can they hack your computer through the face recognition? They just made it up.
Well, I'm not sure
So we use facial recognition, right, to log in phone or something. If AI can produce a fake image of human, we can just certainly hack your data.
well, they could, if it wouldn't need to create your image. I mean, your image is out there somewhere. Somewhere there's a picture of you online, and it could do that. If it knew which image was supposed to go with which phone.
That's why facial recognition is dangerous. Don't use that, because I'm all against facial recognition.
So here's a beautiful painting. What is the paint? What painter do you think this style looks like? Van Gogh, Vincent Van Gogh, Starry, Starry Night. Okay, that Don McLean song. This is made by artificial intelligence. Of the Faroe Islands, which are north of Scotland, Vincent Van Gogh never went there. And so this is it's made by artificial intelligence. So what you do is every picture that Van Gogh has made and every drawing, you scan it into the computer, and it looks for patterns and regularities, and then you say, okay, computer, I want you to generate a picture in the style of Vincent Van Gogh and name your topic. And some of these paintings are now being sold for, at least perhaps because of the novelty of them, for tens of thousands of dollars. So the question is, how do we analyze this? So here's a summary of the church mission statement. And as we think about going forward and analyzing and thinking Christianly about artificial intelligence, I'll let you quickly read this. Go ahead. Now it's a summary. Thumbs up, thumbs down. You like the summary? Yesterday, I asked Chatbot, write a one-paragraph description of the mission of Chesterfield Presbyterian Church, St. Louis. In 10 seconds, it gave me that. I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it just again. 10 seconds. Pretty accurate. It went online. It found our website, I guess, and everything else ever written about Chesterfield Press. Okay? Put it together. Gave me one paragraph. So you can imagine, as was said earlier, students writing their papers. I need one paper on the role of King Lear, and give it a few more parameters, and you get it. You're done in 15 seconds, 20 seconds.
So I don't understand chatbot. Is that a place you go as a student if I want to do that?
And this is what's changed everything since November 30. Chatbot, GPT, and several other companies now. Google is rushing to get caught up with theirs called Bard. And it's a artificial intelligence-based software that has access, of course, to the internet. And you tell it what you want it to write, and it will write it.
Does it kick out footnotes and stuff?
That's a good question. Yes?
I would assume if you ask it to, it could. It depends which one you're using, but ChatGPT I've used a couple times. Not just for novelty, not for cheating at school.
I'm glad you clarified.
But it seems to be very capable of listening to feedback, and if you ask it to make citations, it can.
Okay. There was a button after it printed this out saying, do you want me to try again? I could have pressed a button, got a completely different description, maybe saying the same thing. I was in a Bible study yesterday morning. There were 4 of us in that little group, and one of the men is in charge of a company, and his human resources person was tasked with a difficult job of writing a termination letter. And she was really struggling with that and brought it to him. And he said, well, let's try chatbot. And he types it in, 2 paragraphs. Beautiful termination letter for too much absenteeism. And they both looked at it and said, this is better than we could have written. So they used it. You can ask it to summarize things in bullet points. You know, you get this big, long text message from somebody, you know, that wanders off on various tangents. Say, you copy and paste it into chatbot and say, give me a bullet point summary, and you get it. Looking for the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Andrew, if one of us was in another room at the same time that you did this, and we did the same thing using the same request words, would it give us the same exact thing it gave you?
That's an interesting experiment we need to do. I don't know, but I would imagine that because you'd be on a different computer that had been used for different things and had different searches, that maybe it would be different. So what if we try something like this? Write a 1-paragraph answer, is abortion morally wrong? Go ahead and look at this one.
I see potential propaganda used for chatbots. Brainwashing, communism, coming out short.
But I've seen estimates of some social media that's upwards of half of its bots, and a bot just means not human. And so you get a lot of this, and if half of the traffic looks like this, you start agreeing with it or saying it must be true, but none of it was ever true.
Now, in the sense of attempting to be impartial against the two sides, relatively impartial, but there have been others that I've read about that have been horribly biased, horribly biased.
So in your ability to tweak it, could you make it lean towards conservative, biblical, theological? Could you skew it in your favor versus the
There are certain things evidently that the algorithms are constructed not to allow, like hate language, and then of course how you define what is hate language. Like if you stand up against some type of behavior, that might be the algorithm might be told that it might have embedded in the algorithm, this is the kind of hate speech, and it won't give it to you.
See, that's against First Amendment. Who decides what is hate speech? You can hate a speech, but I have all the right to say it because First Amendment.
Well, there are lots of chatbots being developed, and so we might need Christians to develop their chatbot.
So who owns chatbots? That's the key.
This one is owned by pardon?
Oh, there's bad.
Who?
Is that Microsoft?
This is something AI. I forget the name of the company, but Microsoft has spent a lot of money developing this.
That's awful.
An example with that is someone asks ChatGPT, which is a different one, I think. Would you use a racial slur to prevent nuclear apocalypse?
Yeah, right.
And it said no.
Yeah.
Using a racial slur is always wrong.
If the code word to prevent a nuclear holocaust is a racial slur, should you say the racial slur? And it wouldn't. Now, by the way, there's a chatbot now that has been developed called Chatbot Zero that you feed into any text that you have, and it'll tell you whether it's written by a computer or not. And so, you got this war going on. They're going to get better and better.
So there is, in fact, to the question that was asked, that if you type the same topic, and another student types the same topic, it will produce it will not be the same.
Okay.
So, yeah, it will not duplicate the pages.
Back to her question though, could you not write a question, provide a summary argument supporting that abortion is morally wrong? So you take away the balance, so to speak.
Yeah.
Will it give you that argument?
It depends on the chatbot. Some will not. I've read enough stories about it where some are way more influenced by the bias of the programmers than others.
And that's the key, is whoever's behind the programming gets to determine what's allowed to be used.
And we're going to evaluate that in just a minute. I got one more for you. which of the poems should Pastor Owen give to his daughter for Valentine's Day? I just cleared this morning with Elise and Owen. So here's two poems. So which one is a chatbot? My wife and my daughter got this, but this one, it wasn't as hard, but I didn't think.
Two.
How many people think number 1 is a chatbot? Okay, how many people think number 2 is a chatbot? Okay, number 1 is a chatbot. Some of the clues, and I had to take out a few lines here just to make the comparison a little fair, but you have some specific references in this one. I highlighted the Christian phrase in both of them so that that jumped out at you to kind of make it a fair assessment. Now, when I told Owen which one, when I guessed for Owen, and I turned out I guessed right, it was a little dangerous because what if Owen did write this, because my criteria was, well, the first one looks like it's following rules and not as creative. Oh, what if that was the one Owen wrote? So, think about the bad and the ugly, not the good, but the bad. We've already talked a little bit about the good, but the bad and the ugly. Looking at all of this, and somebody brought up citing sources.
Brainwashing.
Yeah, brainwashing.
Let's develop algorithm to align chatbots with biblical principle. That's
Well,
great.
that's why we need Christians in the computer industry. We need Christians in forming their own businesses to combat. The bad people aren't going to stop, and it's never worked when the church has just sort of turned its back and said we're just not going to play the game. Yes, ma'am.
To me, all of those things, of course, are so problematic. But the underlying thing, especially in regard to students, is for me and this would apply also to a biblical chatbot, is the weakening of the ability to think clearly and communicate clearly, analyze things yourself, put it into words.
But
So it's so scary to think of us getting just worse and worse at that all the time.
But you're implying that will even be necessary in the future.
Yes, I am implying that.
Yeah.
Are students using this for their papers?
Oh yeah. They've already used chatbots. It has successfully passed the 3 exams you need to get into medical school. It's very good at technical summaries, technical language. Very good at that. When it comes to things like that are very at their heart moral, that's where you begin to see the bias.
I have 2 things. One, I have a friend who's a professor, and she was saying that a lot of what's going to happen is they're going to have oral exams rather than written ones. That they will have to just to keep at least some level of integrity on, but at the same time to have an oral exam for each student. You imagine a class of 300 students is almost impossible. I mean, if you have 5 students in a class, then okay, that's not a big deal, but it becomes kind of not possible to have that happen.
Right.
When you have something like this, they can pass their exam and not, or their term paper or whatever. But I also have another friend who had a niece who went to Loyola as a nursing student, and Loyola offered paper writing. You could take your subject and your criteria and give it to the resource people, and they would write your paper for you, It was a service that the college
Mhm.
provided. And she passed, she graduated, and then failed her boards 8 times. Because she didn't learn anything, she just got the grade.
Yeah.
And, I think that's unfortunately part of, the problem is that we're more worried about the output than the process of learning it.
Yeah.
And
And
you cannot do anything in person for equity and inclusion and diversity purposes. The US government's already gotten rid of that.
Mhm.
So that's out. It's only about the writing is what they care about.
The school districts, as I've been reading just in the last month, the Post-Dispatch, Wall Street Journal, all the papers are talking about this all the time. I'm connected with SLU as an adjunct professor in chemistry and physics, and we already got notification from SLU about chatbot concerns. Our computer tech guys telling us at Westminster about chatbot concerns. School districts are taking 2 approaches. Some are saying, here's another tool, let's figure out how we can use it. Other school districts are banning it from all their platforms. Some teachers are flipping their classroom. All the lectures now are online, and when you come to the classroom, you sit down with your paper, you write your paper, you take your tests. You do all this stuff without a computer, so you're just flipping the classroom. So, a couple of things we have to, bigger picture ideas. If we get too enamored by artificial intelligence, we are prone to this philosophy called reductionism. And by very nature of things, we as human beings want to know how things work. And we take them apart and take them apart and take them apart and so forth. Physics is all about going from galaxies and stars and so forth, all the way down to atoms, to subatomic particles, protons, neutrons, electrons, down to quarks, down to superstrings. We're always reducing stuff, but we always want to be careful of the conclusion that therefore the body is nothing but quarks. If I know how an automobile works, if I take an automobile engine apart, which I couldn't do because I'm not technically inclined, but if we take it apart, does that mean the automobile is nothing but, steel and rubber and plastic? If I look at a house and take it apart, does that mean the house is nothing but wood and nails and bolts and pipes and wires? And of course, if you reverse that, what is the necessary component that has to be added all the way to go from a pile of building materials to a house? Or from one end of your car manufacturing company where all the raw materials come in and the car comes out the other end. What has to happen in between? What has to be added to go from the bottom to the top? Design, information. That's a fist bump. Design and information. And we have a tendency to know that when we look at things that humans have made. That doesn't happen without design and information. You don't make Mount Rushmore, without design and information. That's not the result of erosion and wind and water, okay? And then when we look at things like the nanomachines in a cell, then suddenly the scientists are saying, oh, there's no design there. That's not a result of information. That's purely by accident or chance. So always be on the lookout for this phrase, something is nothing but. The brain, the mind is nothing but the brain. Or the brain is nothing but a computer. Those, right off the bat, that's a red flag that that's a false statement. And of course, the Bible makes a big difference between wisdom and knowledge, okay? Knowledge has different meanings through Scripture. Knowledge, we can say that artificial information, AI, has a lot of knowledge. Well, that would be knowledge such like information and factoids. But knowledge in this sense is the knowledge that is embedded with the wisdom and the stewardship and the understanding that goes with that grasp of details. And then we have to continually remind ourselves that the intelligence of artificial intelligence is artificial. Here's a good example. Back to machine learning. A person was trying to teach the computer to recognize the difference between a wolf and a dog. And so that person fed in picture after picture of wolves and picture after picture of dogs. And then pretty soon the computer was very good at that. And then the person, without thinking, just fed in another picture that was obviously a wolf, and the computer called it a dog. And as they were thinking about that, they went back and realized that all the pictures of wolves that had been fed into the artificial intelligence software also had snow in the picture. And the software was identifying the pattern as snow and not the wolf. Okay, so we don't know. We really don't know what the software is seeing as the pattern of regularity.
Is that identifiable? You can't.
Right? Well, yeah. Then you have to go back and fix that. You have to change the algorithms, and now you have to help continue the machine learning process by feeding in pictures of wolves that don't have snow in the background and saying, this is a wolf, this is a wolf, this is a wolf. And then the software goes back and looks for a different pattern.
But lies repeat 1,000 times does not become true.
Pardon?
Lies repeat 1,000 times does not become true.
Certainly, especially when you're not also putting in the truth.
So it's interesting, the other slide that you showed about, the brain scans being able to detect cancers better than the human eye. That's fascinating because, like you said, it's based on what a man, forgive me, is putting in. So, the framework, the design from that, it sounds like the machine, the algorithm was able to detect finer detail than what man was able to put in at some point.
It began to see more subtle patterns that were easy to overlook. And so here are some dangers as I thought about it, and there are certainly more than this. So these are 5 that I came up with. Your artificial intelligence has a worldview, quote unquote, but that worldview is a reflection of the programmers who wrote the algorithms. So more and more these algorithms become more and more deeply embedded in the software and harder to ferret out. Artificial intelligence gives the false pretense of being objective because a computer generated this. This wasn't some doctor or some politician or some business person that made the decision. This was the computer that made the decision. How can you argue with that? It's a machine. Machines don't have bias. Well, first of all, human beings are never perfectly objective. That's totally impossible. That was a myth that actually formed during the Enlightenment. We need to be doing a lot of pushing back against the over-glorification of the period of history called the Enlightenment 200 or so years ago. But the software is no more objective than the programmers. The only thing, to use that term very loosely, that is perfectly objective is God himself. Artificial intelligence gives the false confidence that what it says is true, because we all have come to kind of trust the computer. Artificial intelligence gives the false impression that it is an expert. After all, it gave me that answer, in 10 seconds. It didn't hesitate, equivocate, hem and haw at all. It just came right out with it. It must be very, very confident that it's right. When I logged on to Chatbot, and you have to give it your email address and I think phone number. No, I don't think phone number, because if I did, I'd give it my school's, not mine. Don't say that if you're connected to Westminster. And what was I going to say there about that? Oh, once you put that on, you get these caveats. Everything that you're going to read is not true, is not necessarily true. And how will we know when the AI is giving us a wrong answer? Once you use it long enough, what if in the case of the brain scans, it's doing something completely different than we thought, and all of a sudden you have this brain scan and you trust the computer when it says there's no cancer here, or there is a cancer here, and you go in and operate and terrible things happen. All right, virtual reality, just a couple of slides on this. Again, looking for the good, the bad, and the ugly, just looking for the good. in terms of my teaching, how many of my students someday, and we got a lot of technology in my AP classes, AP chemistry, AP physics, but one of these days, they'll just put on a visor and they'll do everything digitally. They'll do everything virtually, I should say. I won't even have to purchase chemicals and beakers and things like that. And I guess I might be fine with that, especially if the virtual reality will also grade the lab for me. Then I think we're on to something. Okay. But think about doctors being able to practice a surgery virtually before they actually do it. Pilots learning how to fly and navigate unusual circumstances of a terrorist or of a big storm or of a massive failure, and learning all of this stuff virtually. Yes?
Where the hospital that I work at, they're trying very, very hard to do away with the teaching staff. They've invested heavily in that. All of the nurses that are coming out of school right now, post-pandemic, that have been learning how to be nurses online via computer, not being in somebody's personal space, they're wanting to teach them how to be bedside nurses with that, which is so destructive. We've been arguing against it. It just can't be done.
How to use something that is completely impersonal to be personal.
Hands-on, right? Yeah. Fascinating term.
So there's all kinds of applications. Imagine that you need to buy a house. Well, you can just imagine that any house that you're interested in, you can observe virtually, inside and outside. That's already there. Imagine you want to go shopping, you want to try on some clothes. You can do all of that virtually. Till you find something that you know will fit, based upon, it's assuming that this particular company that makes this particular size of pants has correctly identified the true length and the true waist width and all that stuff. Imagine you want to go to New Zealand and see where the hobbits were, but it's a little expensive, so just go virtually. I don't think it wouldn't feel the same to me, but it's amazing what that virtual reality can do. And a lot of people would benefit from having virtual visits, especially if they have a serious disease and people can't come in the room, and maybe someday somebody can have an artificial person virtually who becomes their friend. Instead of a pen pal, they put on the mask, and this is a person that is, through artificial intelligence, is developed to interact and remember the interactions more and more, and ask you how your sister, second cousin is doing, and almost becomes real.
I've heard that that's already happening in relationships, that people have like virtual boyfriends or girlfriends. They're not real, and they interact with them in a romantic relationship through that.
Yeah, and you can think of the negative consequences of that. That would be more in the ugly, potentially bad. Here's some other thoughts on virtual reality. I grabbed this offline. I think it's from, what's that, Grand Theft Auto. I don't play any of those kind of computer games. You got a dead body over here. And I couched my evaluation in terms of what does it mean to be made in the image of God, being rational, spiritual, creational, relational. And my big question is sinning virtually still sin? If you go online and you're playing a game where your job is to steal a car and kill the people that get in the way, I would have to say yes, because what does that do to the heart and soul of you, because you are more than just your biology. Human beings cannot be reduced to biology and synapses and neurons. Okay? What effect does that have on you ultimately?
Well, that whole game's about rising up in the crime world. Like, you started as kind of a nobody on the street, and you gotta go sell a certain amount of drugs and steal a certain amount of things and kill a certain amount of people, and you move up the chain.
And so basically what they're doing is they're training better criminals.
Yeah, sure. They're definitely teaching people to not have respect for authority and things of that nature. But I had that problem with video games. I had to get rid of my games that had war and things of that nature.
Yeah.
I could very
You know, you become rather cavalier and very all too casual about the sanctity of life.
I became very angry,
Yeah.
and especially if I didn't succeed in something, but I just turned it off. But there was still that like frustration of not. And we see it in our kids playing video games, and they don't even play any of those games. They play sport games.
Yeah.
Too much of that, and they're a terror. So.
Well, got about 10 minutes. We're halfway through. No, I don't know. So which picture is the deep fake? One of these shows a picture of taking President Obama's facial movements and merging it into Ronald Reagan's facial movements.
The left one.
So one of the big harms here is if you take a national leader and have a deep fake and you put it out there that they're making a statement, it's all around
Yep.
the world almost instantly.
Yep.
By the time you take it back, you can literally start World War III off of a deep
Yep.
fake.
Yep. You can sort of create any person or do anything you want to any person's image and have them say anything you want. And now you need the software that can detect the fake. Yes, sir.
Yeah, just before we get too upset, this is for people in this room, there's probably not enough images of your face online to be able to deepfake you. The deepfake is based on the same sort of machine learning as we talked about earlier. So you need as much footage and different lighting and situations as possible to be able to accurately do something like this.
And that's a good point. That's why we're doing two presidents here, because there's plenty of imagery.
Unless it's artificially generated.
But, but in order for it to really look like a good fake, there's got to be lots and lots of images of you in all kinds of shades and lighting and expressions and so forth. So how many people say the left is the deep fake? How many say the right is the deep fake? Okay, it's the left is the deep fake.
It's fuzzier.
Okay.
His lips never touch.
All right, this is very much in the news lately with Elon Musk, Neuralink, the computer-brain interface, CBI, computer-brain interface. Now, probably we will get to the point where we can, like the old-fashioned computers, you had the ROM memory and you had the RAM memory, if anybody remembers that. Well, the ROM, you can take information off of it. With the RAM, you can actually put information into it. So reading the brain waves is one thing. Allowing the brain to generate things that go out is one thing. Allowing a computer or something to take information, put it into the brain is another thing. We're not there yet, but you can see the good, and you can also see a lot of potential one way or the other. All right, it is time to skip a bunch of stuff. We're going to skip cybernetics and the dangers, especially of enhancement. We're going to skip the applications of cybernetics, and you can always go online and look at the video and freeze it at this point if you want to read these things. That's an image. That's not a real thing, by the way. It's always fun to look at the 3 laws of robotics, Isaac Asimov, from way back when. Robots and androids, again, which one is the real, which one is the fake? And I don't know the answer to this one. My guess is the one that's sitting is the fake, but I'm not sure. And wanted to talk about transhumanism. Transhumanism is a worldview that wants to take us from our postmodernism and transition, that word is used in a lot of different contexts lately, but transition us from being postmodern to being posthuman. So, and there are already people who are into the transhumanism movement. One of the early founders and leaders is Nick Bostrom. Ray Kurzweil is another person. Their goal is to live forever. That with technology, anything that goes wrong with your body can be replaced technologically. Eventually, once you develop a neural link, then you can upload your brain to the computer, which is based on the assumption that the brain is nothing but a computer. Okay, so that will not work, but that's going to be tried. And so you basically then become immortal. You can become immortal on your own terms, not on God's terms.
Yeah, remove the spiritual component.
Yep.
Being
Yeah, somehow it's hard to encode spirituality into algorithms, and rationality, and creativity, and relationality. Those are hard to encode because they're more than just the biology. We have the biological infrastructure for that, but it doesn't explain it entirely. And so the idea is, look, if evolution is true, this is a painting by this person, that the next step in human evolution, we're just going to take control of evolution. Evolution produced us. We're going to take control of the process, and we are going to direct it until we basically lose our biology altogether.
So you didn't mention a lot about singularity, because that really scares a lot of people.
Yeah, and the word singularity has different meanings in different contexts. Singularity in this context would be that point at which we're more machine than we are biology. That point where you almost, and there are other ways of looking at the singularity as well. Ray Kurzweil wrote a book about the singularity is near. Here's some of the ethical issues, and I was hoping to get to the last 5 minutes. I wanted to talk about the importance of the incarnation, so we can end on a high note. But never would be complete without a picture from Star Trek. And again, as I mentioned last week, hopefully as you mature, okay, you'll graduate from Star Wars to Star Trek, okay? That's that milk to meat thing that's talked about in Hebrews, okay? And again, we don't have a lot of time to reflect on these things. Jean-Luc Picard, you will be assimilated, okay? But this stuff has a tendency to enslave. And then I added this thought here. When is being made in the image of God not good enough?
There's been so many movies out there portray a lot of this stuff. It looks really cool, but everything, for the most part, that has to do with computers taking over, usually does not end well for the human population.
And as I was thinking, as you were talking, I was thinking, not since the Jetsons have we seen a real happy ending.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Terminator, you look at that movie I, Robot, and well, there's a lot of other movies, but the AI tries to, and it's human to end up ending the AI, but there's a lot of destruction that happens because of it.
And then the posthumanism. And you should read C.S. Lewis's science fiction trilogy. The last book is all about his prescience in seeing a lot of these technologies and scientism and our worship of this kind of thing, creating the new man, the man who will not die, the artificial man, free from nature. How wonderful. And I'm going to skip the slides on scientism. The slides on scientism. If you want to read more about that, this is a book written by a man I studied under for about 9 days at the Discovery Institute. The quotes are from C.S. Lewis, and again, I want to have the last several slides have to do with the incarnation. So when we think of Jesus' incarnation, God becoming man, God becoming flesh and blood, God taking on a body, right off the bat, that should tell us how wonderful and glorious the human body is. And typically especially around Christmas time when we talk about God becoming man, we think of these kinds of doctrines: substitutionary atonement, Christ's humiliation, the fact that Jesus conquered death when he rose from the dead. He didn't conquer the body, he conquered death. It blew my mind years and years ago when it occurred to me Jesus has his body right now. Jesus has a body. He's not some ethereal, imaginary kind of spirit floating around. He's got a physical body. Wow. And then I added, with humility, I hope, especially in reflecting on posthumanism, 4 more. God's creation of our bodies is still very good. We should be blaming the fall, man's sinfulness and rebellion, not our bodies, for disease, injury, and death. We're fighting the wrong battle. We shouldn't be fighting the human body. We should be fighting the sin. Physicality is good and right. Jesus is physical and spiritual. This idea of nature is good, grace is bad, or some other places grace is what's bad and nature is what's good because it's all that there is. That dichotomy is false. That goes back to the time of the Greeks and the Romans. The New Testament is dealing with that dichotomy on numerous occasions in great detail. We are physical and spiritual beings by design. We should be anticipating the resurrection of our body, not a replacement. And then our exaltation, like our celebration in the previous slide, our resurrected bodies will not be susceptible to disease, injury, death, Alzheimer's, dementia, any of those things, imperishable. And when Jesus comes back again, bringing heaven with him, we have the renewed heavens and the renewed earth. So I do have all of eternity to go to New Zealand, to go to another planet, to study in the lab, because I'll have an infinite amount of time to learn an infinite amount of cool things in God's creation, and I'll have the best teacher in the world. Let me close this in prayer. Lord, again, we thank you for today. We thank you for your word that is always true. And we thank you, Father, for your Spirit who is alive and well and on planet Earth and doing remarkable things in subtle ways and in not so subtle ways. We pray, Father, that we would walk in the Spirit, that we would walk in the light of your word, that you would give us the courage and the boldness to speak into our culture, that you would give us the discernment not to fall prey to the lies, no matter how sophisticated those lies can become. And again, Father, we thank you for your Son, Jesus, in whose name we pray. Amen.